Hello, everybody in YouTube land. First of all, good to see you on this Friday. And hello, everybody. Hello, everybody on LinkedIn. Great to see you as well. Welcome once again. It is that time of the week. It is a Friday. It is 12 o'clock. It's time for the Get Hard LinkedIn Growth Live. Great to see you all again. As usual, as we're doing this, please make sure you introduce yourself, say hello. We're getting rapidly close to Christmas now, so it's we hopefully everybody's in the Christmas spirit and feeling quite positive. There's only one more week to go. We are going to have one more of our LinkedIn Lives for 2026. We'll have one more of that, maybe a sort of a more festive episode. I'm not quite sure what the theme should be. Maybe some of you should come up with some great ideas here. So look, as ever, it's great to see you. To get there as well. I can see already that some of you have already joined. I'm not even sure which one of Nena or indeed of Foxy have managed to get there first. I think Nena, you managed to do it first today. So look, well done and congratulations. Great to see you. Make sure also when you're saying hello to each other, make sure you introduce each other, say where you're from, whereabouts in the world. We are spreading out more and more each week. We're noticing that we're getting people from every continent on the planet, which is amazing to really to think so. But look, it's great to see you all. Ian, great to see you. Good morning. Always good to see you here as well. Nena, yeah, I was probably a minute late. I'm blaming the fact that, of course, my glamorous assistant isn't here. He's flying back from Australia, so next week will be a lot better in terms of approach, and I'll be on time that way. That's making sure that we always are. Marco, great to see you as well. Greetings from Antwerp. Always good to see you here as well, and good to see in terms of where it is. Pauline, I love this message. You had your baked beans delivery. Goodness, that's going to be interesting to Christmas. So just now, so ready to go. That's fantastic to see. It's always good to see everybody is getting ready for it as well. Ian from Blueberry. I don't know where that is. Oh, I see. It's right in the middle of the Reading, Newbury, Oxford triangle. I really should know where that is, but I don't actually know that at all. Pauline in Devon. Oh, good, great to see that. I love Devon. I went to school there many years ago. I'm afraid to say, but I did do as well. Saskia from Belgium. Great to see you as well. Welcome. Always good to see that. Annabelle. Yeah, I really don't know where Blueberry is. I should really know where that is, but I don't at all. Annabelle, great to see you in Farnham. Though it's always good to see that. On that side. Look, this week it's going to be a really interesting one. I think I wanted to tackle in particular this week a topic that I know that so many of us have issues with, and that is over the horrible subject of ageism. But it's something that affects everybody from the beginning of your career right the way to the end. And I appreciate that for a lot of people, the real struggle I think a lot of people are having is when you get to the slightly more experienced age spectrum, you start facing an awful lot of discrimination, some more overt than others. And I thought it was really worthwhile for us to start delving into this a lot more, to really try and find and understand why this is still happening and what you can do about it. Because that's the other thing I think that people really struggle with, is how to try and deal with, in a really difficult market, when people are making assumptions based on something you have absolutely zero control of, which is your age. There's nothing we can do about that. But it is seriously a problematical thing. Perhaps be good, add into the comments there. Let's find out a little bit more, find out how your experience is, whether you've experienced something, and let's tackle it head on. So, if you've got some examples, I've got some examples I'm going to share as well. But if you've got some examples that you would like to add to it, then absolutely put it in there. Let's see what we would do in order to try and deal with it as well. Carolyn, hi from Harrogate. I know I'm not far away from you, and it is a little bit miserable here today as well. Sherry, great to see you from London. Thanks for coming. And yes, Nena, it is no joke. It isn't particularly funny, but why do you think this is still happening? Ageism stopped. It should have been, or was made illegal, or should I say unlawful, because there is a technical difference between illegal and unlawful. It was made unlawful in 2010 in the UK. Across the EU, it has been unlawful as well. All different jurisdictions have different degrees for it. In some European countries, it is a very serious matter that has massive implications for companies, and indeed in some countries for the legal representative of the company themselves can be personally held liable for any proven age discrimination in the recruitment process. And across most other countries around the world, all have different degrees to it. Obviously in North America, they have a number of different discrimination legislation there. So if we have all this legislation, why do you think it still keeps on happening? What are the issues that mean that people are still doing this? Why are they still coming for that? And look, and Pauline, you're absolutely right. Some of the things that are coming through, things like too technical, too much leadership experience, you've got too much experience. That happens a lot to come through. Please just say what you mean. I have white hair. Yeah, well, I've got what hair I've got, I think, is a little bit white, but hey, I've taken to wearing coloured wigs at interview. That's probably a step too far, but that seems to happen a lot. Ian, culture fit or too experienced, absolutely. It happens all the time. Those are that sort of long list of ones. And why is it that it sort of seems to be always coded in that sort of polite language? Another one that I've heard a lot that people get there, that you might get bored. They might get actually bored, they're looking for fresh energy, the longevity concerns. There was one that somebody actually came back to me on one of my posts. If you go through on my posts, I think it might have been the one today or yesterday, but gave an example of feedback that they had received. And the feedback, then they cut it out, and I'll read it to you. It said that the team had taken a step back and looked again at their overall fit. This is word for word. And we feel that the opportunity just wouldn't give you the scope or seniority you deserve at this point in your career. It's important to me that any role we progress someone through is genuinely aligned with their experience and ambitions. And in this case, I'm conscious that it wouldn't be the right match. Yeah. If that was one of my recruiters, I'd be telling them now, you should not be writing something like that, because clearly what you're effectively saying is that you're too experienced role. Well, you knew all of that beforehand, before you even started in the process. But sometimes I think we need to unpack this a little bit to see, okay, which bit of it is ageism and which bit of it is just clumsy. Is that they're just getting the wrong language. They haven't really thought it through. They haven't been trained properly. They haven't worked out or assessed what it is that you should be assessing. Because there is a difference between, for example, having a role where the role is very operational, but the candidate is actually very strategic. Now, that's got nothing to do with you're too experienced, but that's probably in some instances what they're trying to say, but they're just not saying it right. And then that goes back to the candidate of, okay, look, I need to understand what kind of role is this? How do I pitch myself? Because you might well be somebody, albeit has done a strategic role, could be super operational, actually really, really good at it, but you've just not demonstrated that enough. You've not shown that value to the client itself. So yeah, absolutely. Look, I think that quite often when somebody gets that kind of feedback for it, it sounds like you're just too old. That's what it's sounding like to me. If somebody is saying it's important, I quote it again, it's important to me that any role we progress someone through is genuinely aligned with their experience and ambitions. And in this case, I'm conscious that it wouldn't be the right match. Now, that to me makes it sound, if I was a candidate receiving that, that's going to make it sound like, well, my experience is the length of my age. That's what you're essentially trying to get to. And that in itself is part of the problem. It's part of the problem we're getting, is people are getting feedback like that makes the whole process really super frustrating, incredibly stressful, and one that is not aligned to what it should be. Philip, great to see you. Senior role, too expensive, too threatening to younger managers, mid-level positions, overqualified, won't stay, entry level, too experienced, won't take direction, culture fit concerns. Yeah, I mean, honestly. I keep hearing all of these ones that keep coming through. It's really not ideal in terms of getting that. So Foxy, sadly, there's a misconception that us older people are hesitant to adapt, whereas we were born before the digital world, so we have a ton of experience in adapting. We'll have had to adapt more than any other younger generation. We went from 0 to 100 multiple times. I mean, that is so true, absolutely so true, and that's something that I think that is really important to bear in mind. And part of working out, well, what's your value? How can you demonstrate that value to clients? How do we get to that? So it's important to do that as well from that wise. So companies sort of, I think, they can end up getting to a position where they are indeed sort of disguising illegal decisions with very soft wording. So before we then get to the point of, look, what's really driving these judgments, so the misapprehensions and the subconscious or conscious biases that people are having, let's work out let's remind ourselves of what you can and can't do in hiring. So this is the advice I give to all hiring managers, what you can and can't do when you're assessing individuals and what you have. So there is a number of anti-discrimination legislation that's in place, not just in the UK, across the world. And essentially they all more or less say the same thing. So in other words, when you're interviewing or considering somebody who has applied for your role, there are a number of things that you cannot consider to reject them for. So you can't assess them. And that's some of the things we all know about. So gender, for instance, is not something you can't say, I want to, I'm only going to hire males or females for this particular role. The same with race, the same with religion, your faith and belief, your sexuality, the way that you express yourself on that, in your pronoun, all of these things are covered in that, and also age. So you can't get to a situation where you're saying to someone, you are too old for this role. I'm sorry, you're too near retirement. You're too senior for this role. No, we're not going to have that. So those are the law, and it's very, very clear, and they've been in place for quite some time. Now, part of the challenge that we have, that everybody is aware of, is that proving a discrimination is incredibly hard. It's not easy to do. And not only is it not easy to do, you also have to go through quite a lengthy process in order to get any kind of recompense for it. And in law, what you'll have to then try and get to is what have you lost out from that? So you have to prove a material loss as a consequence of that. Now, I've got no doubt if you collect the right evidence that you're going to be able to do that, but who's going to bother? You're looking for a job. You don't want to start wasting your time in some kind of legal action as well. And that in itself is part of the issue. So we've created a situation where something is unlawful to do, and advising company you cannot do all of these different things. But of course, the penalties for them, which can seem quite harsh, and certainly in some countries can run to hundreds of thousands of euros in terms of fines. But trying to prove that is another thing. And that is sort of what the challenge is. And so you then have a situation where some people, and not all, but some people sort of think, well, I know I can sort of get away. There's no real consequence to it. So therefore, they can still start perpetuating it. And it's something they've thought about for years and years and years. They've constantly had this issue. And it constantly goes back to those old sort of thinking that you're old, so therefore you are not capable of doing something. You might get tired easily, all of these kind of biases that people have. And therefore, no one's really challenged it. And that is where I think it's super important to make sure, and why I want to keep on talking about this, keep on publicizing this, and keep on putting that message forward. Because the more that we talk about it, the less likely it is to start happening. And that's where we start making a difference for it as well. Also, in terms of where we're going to go. So look, let's see what's really driving it. So I mentioned about those sort of biases that people have and those unconscious biases. What do you think? Have you come across that? You may well have seen that not just in a recruiting process, but maybe even where you've been working, maybe even just in normal life where you have it. And we all make those sort of jokes for it. I make that joke about myself all the time. We talk about, hair color, the fact that, I'm getting old, that's why everything's getting a bit painful. That's why I can't run my marathon as quickly as I used to 10 years ago, because we're all getting a bit old. So we all sort of make those sort of jokes, but what ends up happening is that it becomes easy to sort of slip that into the process in hiring. Now, I think, to be fair, I think that there is a great big conspiracy in groups of people that just dislike old people. No, I don't think they are. I don't think they're necessarily doing that at all. I think the majority of it is just because of poor education. They don't really understand what they're doing, and they still have those biases that they've not been challenged on at all. And that's where we need to make a real difference here in that side. So what are the kind of things that people will have those misconceptions? So the misconceptions that people will have, first of all, is going to be on cost. I'm sure all of you have probably had that, where if you've had that kind of issue where people see you as being quite experienced, they're going to make the assumption you're going to cost an awful lot more. So the immediate assumption is, and that's where you then get, where you're filtered out before you've even been interviewed, where you're actually getting anywhere. They just look at it and think they've got 30 years worth of experience. They're going to be too pricey. They'll be too expensive. I'm not going to afford that. So that's the first thing that they will do. The second one is over ambition. Sometimes I've seen it, I've seen it myself, but I've also seen other people where they come back and they sort of say, what's their ambition? And it can be on both sides. So they can say, you're at a certain level, and if you're taking a drop down, they're going to be too ambitious. They're going to want to take my position. So what am I going to do? And they're going to feel insecure themselves for it. And then it can be the other way around. They say, well, they're coming towards the end of they've got no ambition, no energy for it. They're just slowly sailing off to retirement. So why should I take them on? And that sort of then links into that next one of energy. They start having that impression that if you're over a certain age, you're not going to have as much energy as somebody who is younger. And that's where they start to look at it. And then the final one, which I think Foxy had spoken about, is on adaptability. That it's often seen that some people will see that they can't adapt over a certain age. They're not able to be able to adapt easily to it. Whereas, as Foxy, as you say, absolutely rightly, crikey, people over a certain generation, anyone who's gone through who grew up as a child with no internet, no mobile phone, no computers, nothing like that, and then had to literally adapt and learn all of it as it was going along, and sometimes super quickly, really can prove adaptability. They can be the most adaptable on that as well. And that's something that I think is absolutely needs to be dealt with as well. So how do we then deal with it? What do we actually do? How do we deal when you've got these things? And not by how do we overcome it, but how do you deal with it internally yourself? When you receive this kind of feedback, or in terms of what you really think that is, how does that make you feel? What's that sort of human impact? I know myself what it's like. The emotional toll, I think, that it takes, especially for candidates when they're reaching their 40s, 50s, 60s, is immense, absolutely immense. I think it's a really tough one to really try and get through. Now, I'm very mindful that we've got a lot of comments, a lot of questions coming through. Let me just go through here. As I said, my glamorous assistant isn't here to help me out and do that, so I'm going to have to do that. And I'm afraid my ability to multitask is really pretty poor. But I'm going to give it a good old go. So let's have a quick look through, and let's take a pause here and have a look at some of the questions and points that people have raised here. So we've got a couple here. Dame and here, yeah, too technical for me to in the last 3 final stage interviews. Wow, that's always great to hear as well. Justina, ageism in the world of tech is easy to justify for companies. They need someone who has experience in new tools. It's cheaper for them to replace an experienced person for 3 younger people. That can often be the case where it can happen as well. Ian, employment tribunal awards go from 12 months, say, to unlimited if ageism is proven. Absolutely right. So the consequences are really high in the UK. In places like France, for instance, and I think it's worth understanding, in some European countries, in France, for instance, the fines for the company are 230,000 euros. So you can get fined, and you can be barred from bidding for any public tender. And the legal representative can also be personally fined and also can be liable to imprisonment. So that's how serious it is across there. So, but of course, as we've sort of worked out, part of the issue is not necessarily that the fines and the consequences are high. It's getting it there in the first place, which is the tough bit. And a lot of candidates really end up thinking they haven't really got the energy to end up doing that, which becomes a bit of an issue. Yulia went right to the final stage and already touched on the start date during one of the role race, but 48 hours later learned that they would not be making me a contract. A couple of weeks later, I saw on LinkedIn they've taken someone 15 years younger. Yeah, that's not always ideal, is it either? Philip, nobody said too old. They never do. They said overqualified, different career stage, won't fit the culture. But the translation was obvious. 58 is not the age they want. I mean, exactly. And that is a real issue. Absolutely there in a nutshell, Philip, is exactly the point that I think a lot of people end up seeing there with it. And I know that you probably have seen that as you're getting through there and you get to interview, you can almost, when you see the interviewer themselves, you can see them thinking this. You know what's going to be coming, and you can sort of sense it where there is that the unconscious bias that you see them trying to sort of fight it, but it's so obvious. You know that this is going to be coming along, which is a real issue there as well. Philip, again, senior roles too expensive. Yeah, absolutely. That we had that there as well. Let me just quickly go through here. I can see there's a few different questions that we've got here. Damon, I think look, I agree with everything you're saying, but I'm afraid in the technical world we live in, being of a certain age would suggest that you're unable to adapt or learn. Again, that adaptation, that learning new things couldn't be further from the truth, and I completely agree. I think that's certainly true. And look, there's a reason why I think it's really important for me to go through all of these different comments that you're saying here as well. They just want cheap labor to a degree, Nana. That is true. Often they'll have budgets there, but the issue is then, of course, you sort of know what it's going to be, but they just don't believe you. So because you might have been earning something a lot more, or they perceive you're earning more, they just think that what's going to happen is you're going to take this role and it's going to be a stopgap. So in other words, that the capability of the person in front of you is going to be worth more. They look at it and think, well, they're going to leave in 6 months' time because somebody else is going to offer them twice the amount of money. And that's part of an issue that you can get as well. I've got no doubt you're expensive and you are great value as well, Foxy, in more ways than one, I'm sure. Marco, when age equals cost, what does equal to revenue quality then? Exactly. So it's about trying to work out value. And again, and the reason why I'm going through all of this is what we're starting to do is to get a picture of, look, how do we start to deal with this? We're already starting. If we can understand what's going through people's minds, then we can start to put together a strategy of how to overcome this. How do we start creating the value beforehand so that we're not having all of this as well? A few different questions here. I got some of them are really fun. I don't know whether I should even put some of them up. That they are hilariously good. Here's a question we've got here. Simon, great to see you. What is your advice to candidates to get around this, as you are mostly just agreeing with everyone? I don't know. That's true. Look, I think it's really important. I am going to get to that, because what I want to do is to set the scene of why. Because if you have a process of trying to understand what you do, how to overcome it, the most important thing that you need to do is to understand why. What is it that people are doing? Why are they doing this? What is their thought process to do that? So we have all of those different aspects that we had. We know that they're saying they're too experienced, might get bored, fresh energy. We know that they're looking at around cost. They're looking around ambition, energy, adaptability. So what do you think? What do you think that you can do in the process to do that? Well, look, there are some different processes that we have. The first and foremost is, look, we need to try and address these, because whether we like it or not, if we could wave a magic wand, nobody would do this. But the reality is they're still going to keep on doing it, no matter how much I put this up and publicize it. Hopefully they'll start reducing in that. But we know that we're going to still keep on facing some of these biases. So how do we combat all of that? Well, first, you've got the bias of when people are selecting you. So in other words, selecting you for interviews. So they see your CV, And that's where it is. So again, I'm going to go back to, look, if you are in a situation where your strategy is, I'm just going to apply to as many jobs as possible, rely on my CV, I've got a lot of experience and therefore they must hire me, you're going to be still subject to that. Because what's the value that you're creating? How are you demonstrating that? And that's when the LinkedIn branding, what you need to do on LinkedIn to create value, to demonstrate all of these things, that's where you can start to make a difference. So what you've got to try and do and address is starting to look at value that you do. So we've spoken about whether it's Foxy, and Philip also spoke about creating value. And that's super important to do. And LinkedIn is an amazing platform that you can start to do that. So by content, by comments, by what's in your profile, start to show the value that you bring to any organization. Now, for sure, there's going to be instances where you might be applying for a job that will either be super operational or could be super strategic. So again, you need to adapt some of your content and indeed your CV in order for that particular role. But start to develop that in what you're putting forward on there as well. So, make sure that you have that. I think, Philip, you're a really good point here. Never share age, share your relevant skills and value. 100%. So bear in mind, from a legal point of view, you have no obligation to share your age. You do not need to put your date of birth. You do not need to put any of that information there that will say, you don't need to say you're married and you've got kids or anything else like that. Absolutely not. That is not something that they can ask for during that process. So they don't have to have that, and you can legally withhold that. So don't put that on there. Don't make that an issue. But I think what's really important, and if it was for me, I often always talk about if I was made redundant tomorrow, I wouldn't apply for a single role. Now, I say that to make the point that LinkedIn is so powerful. And so I know and realize you're going to have to apply for some roles. But the reality is, I know at my age, with the level of experience I've got, if I just relied purely on simply on applying for a job only, I think I would be sat there for a long, long time before I ever got hired, because of the natural biases that ends up happening. And in my head, I look and think, well, I'm not going to do that. I want to overcome that. So the way that I overcome that would be, I'm going to first and foremost go to my LinkedIn profile and make sure that I optimize that fully and start to address all of those things that I know I've been getting. So for instance, the fact that they're going to be talking about energy, adaptability, about cost, so, okay, how do I start putting into there this that's going to be relevant for the people who are going to be looking at it? So they already subconsciously, rather than thinking, well, they're really experienced, they must cost a lot of money, or, they're not going to be they've not got much energy there. If they're seeing your content on there, they're seeing the value that you've produced previously, you can see video that you're producing as well. They can see and demonstrate automatically a difference from other candidates. It automatically will just negate any of that subconscious bias that they're starting to have. So you're starting to reduce it already. So the real value and the way that to try and combat this is to combat it before you actually get to the interview. Before you ever have got there, start to bring it down a lot. And then also making sure that you're not going down that route where the traditional route of, I apply for a job, I get a recruiter to see me, they'll either screen me out because I'm too experienced, or it becomes a surprise that when they get to interview and everything else, it's an easy way for them to negate it. What I'm going to do is create that value up front, to go to the leaders, to go to the hiring managers, the directors, the owners, the peers in those companies, my target companies, so that they can start seeing the value that I bring. That's what makes a real difference, because then the whole way that you're interacting with that job interview process has changed. The dynamic has completely shifted. It shifted away from you're just yet another number, another CV. You are the candidate. You're the people that I've reached out to you. I know that you're going to add value. I can see that, and you're demonstrating that. The company are not even going to start thinking about age. So you're starting to really diminish that already. And that's where you can make a real massive difference for it. And I think that's a real important way to make a change in terms of where you go through on next step. Now, there's a few more questions that have been coming up here. Ian, look, leave out education, stop being to enable age calculations. I think it's a really good point. It's a really, really good point as well. And in the same way, I'm more than happy to use my own personal experience. If I was putting my putting my education down, it becomes super obvious. You can work out almost precisely how old I am, because I did O levels rather than GCSEs. So you can see when the difference was when I did that, and you can work out my age from that. Don't put them on. To be honest, I would argue that once you're like 4 odd years in there, nobody's interested in how many GCSEs you've got, or indeed even A levels you've got. Maybe in terms of your university education, they might be. And when you're putting on university education, absolutely the same thing, Ian. I think it's really good advice. Remove the dates. Now, I appreciate in some applications you're going to be doing when you're online, sometimes they will say you've got to input that, and sometimes they can be mandatory. But what you need to check when you look at it, they're not always mandatory when you're doing those applications online. Often organizations will just say, give it, and it'll say what the dates are. But in fact, if you leave them blank, it'll still let you progress through. So try that, and make sure you try that as well, because it can absolutely help you to do that as well. Exactly here. Look, I think I need to be filled in optional diversity questions. Yeah, there's a question there that I think people have, that you can often get asked some questions about your diversity stats. I think, a real question that I get a lot from candidates is, clearly this process is biased because they're asking me what my diversity, what age group I come in, what ethnicity I am, etc., at the beginning of the process. Now, recruiters won't see that. So, and hiring managers won't see that. That is collected data that they use in a completely separate area to try and work out how many people are applying. Are we complying with diversity, equity, and inclusion, etc. Now, it can be super unnerving for candidates, especially if you're of a certain age, a different ethnicity, etc. You can get worried that they're going to be making assumptions about it, but they don't. So don't tend to worry about that as well. So yeah, look, there's a couple of interesting ones here. Yeah, you're talking about Foxy. You have to go back only 5 years. So yeah, look, and Simon, but 5 years might only be one role. I've been told 15. Okay, so I'm assuming this is for how far back you can go on your CV, and it's a really good point. I would look at it from this. So instead of worrying about what I can do, what I shouldn't do, what I got to do, see what's relevant. What is the most relevant part of your career history? The most relevant part is obviously the most recent thing that you've been doing, and then it then pales in significance the further you go away. So clearly, the role that you did in 1991 probably has very little relevance now. It'll probably have some. Clearly, it'll have some. But life has moved on. We're very, very different. We're in a very different stage to what was happening 30 years ago. So do you need to go into a lot of detail on that when you're filling in your CV? No, you don't. You don't need to do that. So yeah, absolutely. I would turn around and say, depending on how long it is, look, the last sort of 10 years, 15 years are going to be super relevant. People are going to be interested in that. Beyond that, not really. You can just bullet point it. You can even just put them together and just say it's various roles prior to this. You don't need to go into that much detail on your CV for sure. So, don't set yourself up in order to try and create that. Absolutely, Pauline. Never add GCSEs and A levels, just my BSc. No dates. Absolutely right. Ian, last to 7-8 years of history. Yeah, and look, there's no hard and fast rule, but you just don't need to be going back 10, 20 odd years ago. That seems to be a little bit pointless to certainly go back to that as well. So what can we then do next? What can you do when you've got through that stage and you're then at interview? Because that's where I get a lot. I think it might have been Pauline that was mentioning, like I do. I've got my grey hairs and slightly losing hair. What can you can't get away from that. You are what you are from doing that. Look, there's a number of different things that you can do there. Sometimes people like to buy from people that they can warm to in different ways, and they can see that. So it then goes back to just good interview technique, when you're going there. And part of good interview technique is understanding who is it, what's the company we're going to, the person I'm seeing. Now and it goes the same whether it's face to face, whether it's on virtual interview as well. Do your homework, find out about them, because if you're going to go to interview at an organization, a company that are fairly casual in what they wear, and they pride themselves on being super casual in what they wear, and then you turn up in dressed to the nines with the really smart suit and looking like that, they're going to make an assumption, and the assumption is you don't fit with our vibe in there. And then hidden behind all of that is going to be a lot of sort of you sort of bringing up that ageism bit, the subconscious, that they're saying, well, they don't fit in because they've just got the old school that they like to wear a suit. And adapt yourself for your audience. It's just basic sales and marketing. So make sure that you understand where it is you're going. Similar the other way around. Look, if this is a company you're going to and they're super smart, and it's expected to wear a suit and tie. There's not very many of those places nowadays, but there are still some. And you turn up super casual, they're going to think of it the other way around, and they'll make assumptions to it. So it's about just dressing the right way for it, understanding them. What do they talk about? How do they interact? What are the things that they like to do? You can get a feel for the values of any organization. Start to mirror those values, show and demonstrate the values that you share with that company as well. Make them feel like you're part of the team before you even are part of the team. So make it as difficult as possible for them to do it without having to sit there and confront them and say, just because I've got lots of grade, but I've got a lot of experience, I can really add value. You don't need to do that. What you need to do is just demonstrate the fact you share their values, you can absolutely add value to them as an organization, and you can pick it up and do that super quickly as well. We're still getting a lot more coming through here as well. Let me just go back through. I'll take a little pause and we can see whether there's quite a few different points that you're coming up with here as well. Let's see, Pauline. Interview technique for an autistic, even after 4 days research, still an issue for me. It's an issue for lots of people, I think, and some of the great companies out there will absolutely make it as open as possible for interview processes, to encourage people from numerous different diverse backgrounds, depending on what kind of assistance that people and support that people need during interview. And there are some really great companies that will make interviews as accessible as possible. And there's nothing wrong, and especially when, if you're needing additional support, to ask the recruiter, especially when on the in-house recruiter there working for the company, to say, I need this, and they should be providing that kind of assistance and help for you. I think we're in a much better place where it comes to doing that as well. I love this point. I love wearing well-tailored suits with double cuffs and cufflinks. You know what? I even though I spent all of my time in fairly casual bits, I do probably miss some of the times of getting really dressed up with a suit and tie. I've got to the point now where I remember when I first started in my career, I had a wardrobe full of tie, like hundreds of them. I've got one left, just one tie, and that which seems to suit for any occasion that is, but it seems to only go out to any formal occasion that I go to, which is a bit of an issue when it goes to that. Look, let's get some more. I want to share a little bit of a personal story for you, and why it is that ageism or age discrimination is something that's very close to my heart, because it's something that I have personally seemed to have had an issue with my entire career. I seem to have had it fought back at me. When I first started out in life, in my work life, I got it the other way round. So I was moderately successful early on, but I ended up getting an awful lot of pushback that you're too young for this role. How can you cope with the seniority, the maturity? How can you do all of this? You've achieved this amount, but how do we know that you're going to do it? We're going to assume you're flighty, you're this, that, the other. All of that. I suffered really hard to try and break through in the different careers I had. And I started my careers out in direct sales, and I was a very ambitious young man, and I wanted to be successful. I got married very early and had children when I was quite young. So I had a big family life early on, lots of responsibilities, and I needed to earn, and I wanted to do it for them, and that's what I wanted to do. But I kept on coming across this in lots of different variants of life. Now, did I ever sort of push back and sort of think, oh, the whole system's against me, and what did it? No, even if perhaps the system might have been a little bit against me. What I did was I constantly, in a world that did not have LinkedIn, did not have any of these kind of great things, that I had to try and create value and try and show and demonstrate that I wasn't a threat. I remember in particular one interview I went to. This was a long time. It was quite early on in my career, and it was going for a sales role. And the chap who was interviewing, the sales manager who was interviewing me, was he was probably somebody sort of later on in life. He'd been doing it a long time, super experienced, and we had a great interview, and I thought we did really, really well. And at the end of it, I asked him, I said, I'm really interested. I'd love to come. What's the next stages? What's the process you could run through with me? And he said, look, Nigel, he goes, you're a great candidate. You're a really great candidate. He goes, but I think you're just too ambitious. He goes, I think if I hired you, you'd have my job in 6 months. And it really shocked me, because I never even thought about that throughout that process. Not once did I think about that. So what I then had to try and do was try to reassure him, and it didn't work, because he was quite adamant about that. And he even said himself, I'm coming up for retirement in a couple of years, and I don't need that, and I don't want the pressure, and I don't want to. And it really made me think when I came out and thought, and it made me think more about really trying to understand the person who's interviewing me when I was going for jobs, and indeed for clients and everything else in the future, but specifically for jobs. If I could understand what their motivation was, the reason why they had these biases, what is it that I can do to try and allay that fear? What can I do in order to try and stop that? And that was something that really stuck with me. And as I started to get older, it sort of flipped the other way around. I'm not sure exactly what age it was, but it went quite quickly from a point of being you're too young to being you're too old. And I even got to that point where it was prior to age discrimination legislation coming in place, where I was specifically asked in a couple of different interviews and told, you are too old for this role. We're looking for somebody a bit younger. I've actually had people who have specifically done that, or even asking me my age and my date of birth. How old are you? How old can you be? And having to sort of push back respectfully. So look, absolutely, people can get this in all walks of life. And what I really liked about the fact that we had that legislation start to come in place was it would at least force companies and organizations to take this into account and to start to attempt training for their hiring managers, to attempt to actually give advice to people to try and stop this. And for sure, it is a lot better than it was back then. So prior to that legislation, absolutely, it was. And it's something that absolutely we all have to face. And I know personally, all of you, as we stand right now, it is a major problem. If you're over a certain age, it is a major problem that keeps on recurring. Every bit of content that I do and bring out, especially this week, where I put a number of different types of content about this particular session and talking about that, it has been extraordinary how many stories that people have shared publicly and also privately as well. And it's heartbreaking, because how can you change that? If you look at it and think, if you're over 50, nearing 60, over 60, whatever age it is, and you've got so much value that you can give an organization, and it was even worse, that, and you think, look, I know that I can just hit the ground running. I can really go for it. And then you've got somebody making assumptions about your age and making assumptions that you've not been able to combat. Often when you think, I've done an interview and absolutely nailed it, and then they come back with the feedback that I shared right at the beginning. It is really something that is heartbreaking to have to put up with. Pauline, great story. And I sad to say, too many senior people are scared of succession planning, and that's very true as well. Succession planning is just like in that story I gave. It's a real issue as well. So it's really worth that when if you're getting to the interview, is sort of assessing and working out the person that we've got here on that, who is actually going to be, what are they thinking? How do they think about when you get there? So I think it's really important for all of us here when you're going through this interview process is to really try and understand the person who is interviewing, the person who's your recruiter, to make sure that you're combating that. So we've talked about making sure you get your LinkedIn. So start setting your value early on. But then throughout the process, you're still having to cover that up. You're still having to make sure, and you'll pick that up. So in the conversations you have with the recruiter, make sure you try and get as many face-to-face. I know we're living in an age where people like to do everything by email. Yes, I admit I am old school in that I do still like to have phone conversations with people, or indeed Teams conversations. I think it's really important from a recruitment point of view that if you have candidates going at interview, you should be, as a recruiter, making sure that you're speaking to them, that you're providing feedback verbally to people. If you are rejecting people, you need to give them feedback and you need to speak to them as well. I think that's super important. Personally, I just think it's just basic politeness to do that. But unfortunately, everything sort of moved away from it. And a lot of times people are frightened of it. A lot of recruiters are frightened of giving rejection. It's the bit that they hate about recruiting. But how do you then deal? So if they're not speaking to you, encourage that. Make sure that you do a follow-up. If they're not doing a follow-up post your interview, book it in. So when they're actually organizing interviews, they're absolutely great. Can we set up a follow-up session so that we get some feedback? You want to develop that relationship. The recruiter is just as vital in helping you through that process as the hiring manager as well. Now, they may not be making the decision, but they absolutely can influence it. And if you've got good recruiters there, they absolutely will be backing you the whole time. But what you've got to do is make sure that you are giving them that. And of course, what you're doing is if you're setting up follow-up meetings, if you're constantly communicating with them and you're doing it in a real positive value add, you're giving feedback back, you're making sure it's really impactful. You're sharing that values of those organizations all the time. They're going to see you not as an old candidate who's lacking energy or passion. They're not even going to think about age. They're just going to say, wow, this candidate's amazing. They're constantly feeding back. They're constantly communicating. They're really passionate about this role. I can see they've got so much energy. They're really driving forward, and they'll feed that back to the hiring manager. So those are all the little tiny ways that you can combat age. But it's up to us, unfortunately, to have to put the hard yards in order to start doing that. I think it's really important to do that as well. We've got a few more coming in here. Make the hiring person grow and support their future position in the company. No treat there. Sounds good, Nigel, but the exception to the rule. Look, look, there are absolutely. I agree with you that perhaps not all of my fellow recruiters go through a perfect scenario of doing it, myself included. You can sometimes forget to do things. But look, that's why I think it's really important from a candidate perspective is to help manage them through that. They all sort of know what they should be doing. So if you take the driving seat with it and make sure you're booking times to see them, give them a call, make sure you get their phone numbers off them, make sure you connect with them, WhatsApp them, so you're constantly communicating, develop a relationship with them. If you're developing a really good, positive, professional relationship with those recruiters, they're going to help you a lot. And trust me, there's some really good recruiters out there. I know they get a hard stick a lot of the time, and sometimes a lot from me as well. But look, there are some really good ones out there, and I know it's not always easy to find them. But sometimes the ones who you might, if you're perceived, and this is the thing, if you're perceived as just another CV, then of course you're giving them an excuse to do that. And that's why I push so hard to everybody. My advice to every single job seeker is don't leave yourself as just another CV. Show that you are the human behind it, because often recruiters and hiring managers, everybody else, they forget they're human beings behind every CV is a human being. They just see it as a CV. It's just a number. We just move through. We just push it through. Create that connection. If you're creating that connection, it's super hard for them to start rejecting you. Make it as difficult as possible for them to want to reject you. You want them to keep on taking you through that process and keeping you engaged throughout of it. Damon, let's see what you've got. I've been out of work following redundancy, caring for my father. I'm sorry to hear that, and good on you as well for doing that during the last year of his life. I'm so sorry. Application for well over 500 roles. Good grief. 10 time Teams interviews, 5 final stages. roles being re-advertised a month or two later, not sure what to do next. Look, it's well, first of all, look, I'm really sorry for your loss, and but also what an amazing story, and great for you to do that. I was in a very similar position with my mum not too long ago. It's an enormous amount of roles that you've invested in. The good news is, at least you're getting interviews. Maybe not for a 500 roles. It seems like not great ratio, and you are getting to final stages. So clearly, there's some really good things happening there. So you've clearly got great experience without looking at your background and what you've been doing. That's good. So what you've got to then start doing, okay, why are they being re-advertised a month or two later? You know, that's a bit strange that that's happening. It can still happen though. So clearly there's something there that they're not too sure about. So usually, you know, if you're getting right the way through to a final stage interview, then I think you've got a lot of positives. I think the real bit that you've got to do, which I think none of us like doing, is being super critical of what you're doing. And the best way to do that for yourself is put yourself in their shoes, work it out from that. So be really dispassionate, and then start analyzing, okay, if I was them, what was it that I would think that I couldn't quite get Damon over the line? Why was it that I couldn't quite commit to it? What was slightly missing from it? Now, sometimes you need to be asking recruiters, you know, look, give me some proper hard feedback. And I know that we talked earlier before, recruiters hate giving feedback. They try and do it with nice, polite language that doesn't cause too much offense. And plus, they're worried if they're too brutal, they might say the wrong thing. But it's important for them to do it. And what you want to try and find is that, is it a skill issue? Is it a presentational issue? You know, is it a soft skill issue? You know, what's the issue there that's preventing it? So look, find that out and see what happens on from that point of view, and then you can work out how you can then start to address that and start changing it. And absolutely, what I would then turn around to everyone and say, look, you know, 500 applications. Other than the fact that, look, amazing that you've done that and you're getting interviews and doing all of that, is really up your game in terms of LinkedIn. That's why I'm such an advocate of LinkedIn. 10, 15, 20 years ago, that did not exist. Your only option for looking for a new job was to apply for a job. That was it. That's all you had. Now the game is changing, and more recruiters are directly headhunting for people. They're going out there to try and find it. And that's why it is absolutely critical that we make sure that you've got your profile completely up to date. You've got the right keywords in there. You're demonstrating your value so that you can be found. When I'm talking about open to work, make sure that you are open to work for the recruiter only as a minimum. You've got to make sure that you can be seen. Make sure you're following the companies that you're interested in, because those are all the categories that they're going to filter and they will search on to try and find you. If you're not doing that, you're just not getting visible. And the new form of recruiting, more and more so, is going to be recruiters dynamically going out to find you. And AI is going to be helping them do that super easily. So it then becomes affordable, it's quicker, and it's more qualitative. And for a company, that's exactly what they're going to want to do when they're going to start hiring people. And that's why I advocate so strongly for doing all of this activity on LinkedIn. And above all, apart from all of that, making sure your content's out there, making sure you're commenting, making sure you're getting seen. So you're trying to cover every single base as well. Okay, right. So look, we're nearly coming to the end of that. And congratulations. Yes, fantastic as well, Marco. Yeah, absolutely. Don't give up. Take a step back. Exactly. Look, I think that's absolutely right. And thank you so much. Make sure, what I love about this community here that we've got is everyone is so super supportive of each other. I think it's really important to make sure that you have that as well. Diane, you've been offered a position today. Absolutely 100%. Congratulations. I'm so pleased for you. After a really thoughtful interview where it was mentioned how hard it is to get employment at a certain age, but they were very appreciative of my experience. Let's address the age elephant in the room. Absolutely. I am so pleased for you. What a fantastic, and look, what a fantastic part to end on, I think, is some really good news like that. Once again, thank you everybody for coming along here. Look, I know that ageism it's a tough subject. It hits us all. And whether any of us like it or not, or whatever it, one thing is for certain, none of us are getting any younger. Well, maybe I am, but none of us are getting any younger. We're all heading there. We've all got to go there. So at some point, it's something that's going to happen to us, whatever age it is. But it's not just a hiring issue. Ageism in that it is a leadership issue. There is something that that can be done, and visibility, education, honest conversation. What we're doing here today is all part of how we're trying to change that narrative, how we're trying to get more positivity, get organizations to look at skills, whether they are soft skills, hard skills, technical skills, to work out the value that people bring, rather than the discriminatory bits, the bits that are irrelevant, because it is completely irrelevant about what age you are, what race and gender, etc. It's irrelevant. What is relevant is, what can you bring to that organization? How quickly can you bring that? So there's lots that we can do. There's lots that we can do from actually changing the way that the world works, one step at a time. It might not be quite over so quickly, but look, thank you once again. As I mentioned, we're going to have one more session next week. I think we're going to make it a sort of like Christmas themed one, so we're going to do that. I can see how we can try and do some kind. I think would be really wonderful in a virtual world to have some kind of Christmas get together, a review of the year of what's been happening, and I look forward to the next year as well. Thank you so much, as ever. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for being such great communicators and really contributing well. If you haven't already, make sure that you connect with each other, support each other as well. We're all in this together to try and help everybody get really fantastic roles, fantastic opportunities out there. If there's anything else out there that you need, please do. Enjoy this weekend. It's just one more week left, and then we're heading officially into Christmas. If you haven't done your Christmas shopping, make sure you get out there and go and do it, or do what I do, get on your phone and just buy everything on Amazon, get it delivered. On that note, thank you so much. Great to see you all. Enjoy it, and we'll see you next week.